Chapter 1. Whispers in the Wind. Long before the strange shapes came gliding through the skies, the land of Ruer had its own quiet mystery. It was a place where the grass swayed like whispers and the earth breathed beneath the feet of barefoot children. The countryside, open and golden under the Zimbabwean sun, stretched for miles in every direction. Fields patched with wild shrubs, dry acacia trees, and the gentle hum of unseen life in the stillness. Everything here moved slowly. Even the wind, warm and drowsy, wandered lazily through the branches, carrying the dusty scent of eucalyptus bark and sun-baked soil. At the edge of this world stood the aerial school, a modest collection of low white buildings with red tin roofs. It wasn't grand, nor was it ordinary. It had a stillness about it that belonged more to dreams than to waking life. A bell would chime to call the children from the open yard, and they would flood the halls in their uniforms. Green dresses and shorts, white socks, scuffed shoes. They were children of farmers, teachers, tradesmen. They were curious and clever, full of energy, full of laughter. And on this particular Thursday in September, they were restless. The sun was high, the sky cloudless, and the heat lay over the land like a warm blanket. It was break time, and the older children were gathered in small groups, chasing each other between trees, kicking up small clouds of dust as they ran. The younger ones clustered around the swings and under the shade of the large gum trees that bordered the far edge of the playground. Beyond the trees, a narrow stretch of scrubland ran wild, untamed bushland where dry grasses scratched at the ankles and thorny branches arched like fingers reaching toward the path. They were told not to go there. The brush was thick and snakes sometimes curled in the shadows, but it was also where the air felt different, heavier, quieter. And then something changed. At first it was a shimmer, like heat rising from a road, but this shimmer had weight, presence. It hovered above the brush, faint and flickering. Some children noticed it without knowing why they were staring. Their game slowed, their laughter faded. One girl squinted into the light and tilted her head. Her friend tugged on her sleeve and whispered, "What's that?" Farther out, just beyond the line of trees, something metallic floated above the ground. It wasn't large and it didn't move fast. It hovered with a stillness that defied explanation. No hum, no wind, no sound at all. It looked like a disk, smooth and silver, its surface gleaming like wet stone. It hung low, almost hidden by the grass as though it were trying not to be seen, but it was too late for that. A boy froze mid-step. His eyes widened and he raised his arm to point. Others turned to look. A few laughed nervously, uncertain of what they were seeing. But more and more children gathered, drawn forward as if by a magnet. They stood together at the edge of the trees, staring through the thin veil of branches into the tall grass beyond. Then they saw it. From behind the silver object, a figure stepped forward. It moved like no one they had ever seen. Its limbs were long, its body slim, its skin a strange pale gray. It wore something black, tight to its form, almost like a suit. Its head was large, too large, and its eyes were the most unnatural thing of all. They were enormous, pitch black, shaped like teardrops turned sideways, and they seemed to hold every child's gaze at once. No one screamed, no one ran. The children stood locked in place, breath caught in their throats as the being came closer. It didn't speak. It didn't raise its hands. It simply looked at them. Then from behind it, another form appeared. Two of them now standing together, watching in total silence. And yet something was being said. Several of the children would later speak of a feeling, a voice inside their heads, not with words, but with thoughts and feelings. One girl would describe it as a warning. Another would say it felt like sadness, like the world was crying. Some felt dizzy. Some wanted to run but couldn't move. One said it was like being underwater in a dream where nothing made sense and everything was too clear. The older children reached out to the younger ones, holding their hands, steadying them. A small boy whispered a prayer he had learned from his grandmother. Another began to cry silently, his eyes fixed on the silver disc. And then, just as suddenly as it had come, the light changed. The shimmering air bent like the surface of a bubble, and the craft rose, smooth, effortless, like smoke caught in reverse. It lifted above the brush, hovered for a moment longer, then tilted ever so slightly and shot into the sky. No sound, no trail, just gone. The two figures vanished with it. The silence that followed was enormous. The world seemed to breathe again. The cicadas resumed their hum. A breeze stirred the trees, and 62 children stood blinking in the sunlight, each one holding something strange and secret behind their eyes. They would not know, not yet, how deeply this moment would follow them. But they knew they had seen something, something not of this world. Chapter 2. The Children Speak. After the object had vanished into the sky, silence hung over the aerial school grounds like a curtain. The children stood motionless, their eyes scanning the empty horizon, as if expecting the shimmering disk to return at any moment. But the brush was still. The clearing beyond the gum trees returned to ordinary space. Sunlight on dry grass, shadows cast by quiet branches, and no sign at all of what had just happened. The silence broke slowly, and it broke in whispers. "What was that? Did you see the eyes?" "I couldn't move." Children began to speak in hushed tones, as if afraid that raising their voices might bring the beings back. Some clutched their friends' hands, others stared down at the ground, lost in thought, and a few looked to the sky, their faces pale and expressionless, blinking slowly in the bright light as if waking from a trance. One girl, no older than 10, sat down in the dust and wept quietly. A boy beside her offered a hand but said nothing. There were no teachers nearby. Most of the staff had been inside the main building, attending a meeting in the faculty room. Only a few older students had been tasked with supervising the break period. They too had seen the craft, the figures, the strange, wordless communication, but none of them knew what to say. By the time the teachers returned, the energy in the playground had shifted completely. Something had settled over the children like a fog. They were shaken, subdued. A few spoke at once, hurried and breathless, trying to explain what they had seen. Others remained quiet, their brows furrowed in thought. Mrs. Stevens, a teacher who had worked at Ariel for years, approached the group with calm authority. She listened, her brow tightening with each new detail. She expected exaggerations. Children often mistook airplanes or weather balloons for extraordinary things. But this was different. There were too many of them, too many voices repeating the same story with too much precision. Their drawings, some already beginning to sketch the scene with crayons and pencils, showed the same disk, the same gray figures with large black eyes, the same eerie stillness. They had big heads and the eyes were like this, one child said, holding his hands up like ovals in front of his face. And they didn't talk, not with mouths. "I heard them in my head," said another, a girl with long braids and a trembling voice. "They told me things, not words, like pictures." "What kind of pictures?" the teacher asked gently. The girl shook her head, unsure. It was the earth and fire, and trees falling down. Other children nodded. Some had seen the same. Others described different impressions. Animals dying, oceans rising, machines digging holes in the ground. It made no sense, and yet it made all the sense in the world to them at that moment. It felt real, more real than anything they had ever experienced. By early afternoon, the entire school was murmuring. The headmaster, Mr. Vernon, was skeptical at first, but as the children were brought into the office in small groups and asked to recount what had happened, a pattern began to emerge, not just in the details but in the emotion. The fear wasn't fabricated. These weren't stories spun for attention. There was something haunted behind their words, something that made the adults exchange glances in quiet alarm. One teacher who had remained unconvinced spoke to a group of children during their lunch break. She asked casual questions, expecting the stories to unravel under scrutiny. But they didn't. Each child described the same being, the same floating object, the same sense of pressure in the air. Their stories diverge only in angle and proximity. Who was closer to the fence? Who saw the eyes first? Who felt the message clearest? The consistencies were chilling. Later that day, some of the children were encouraged to draw what they saw. The art room, normally filled with vibrant pictures of houses, animals, and smiling suns, was soon covered with something else entirely. Silver discs hovering above the grass. Black-eyed beings with long limbs, strange energy lines coming from their heads toward the children's faces. Had something, anything, really happened? Or had a few overactive imaginations planted a seed that grew too quickly? There was something about the gravity in the room when they spoke. Something about the faraway look in their eyes. They weren't excited. They weren't laughing. They were remembering. That evening when the parents arrived to collect their children, murmurs of concern spread like wildfire. Some children, once home, refused to speak of it. Others spoke only in fragments before falling into silence or tears. Some, unable to sleep that night, stared at their bedroom ceilings. The memory of those black, emotionless eyes burned into their minds. In the quiet rural stillness of Rua, where nights came quickly and the stars blinked down like ancient watchers, something had changed. The air felt heavier. The wind carried new tension, and the children of Ariel School were no longer the same. They had seen something. Chapter 3. Echoes in the Classroom. By morning, the school grounds had returned to stillness. The sun climbed lazily over the savannah, casting soft gold light across the rooftops of the Ariel School. Birds chirped from the branches of the gum trees, and the warm scent of dust and eucalyptus rose gently with the breeze. It was, by all appearances, just another day. But inside the classrooms, something hung in the air, an invisible weight, a quiet tension that pressed against the walls and clung to the edges of every word. The children filed into their seats with the usual scraping of chairs and rustling of papers, but their chatter was subdued. Eyes flicked to the windows, hands clutched pencil cases a little too tightly. Even those who tried to act normal carried a strange quietness, as though they were moving through a story they didn't know how to tell. Miss Brooks stood at the front of her class, a slim woman with dark hair pulled back in a bun. She had been teaching at Ariel for 8 years, and she knew these children well. That morning, as she watched them file in, she sensed something was wrong. Not just nerves, not the usual back-to-school blues. Something deeper, something in their faces. The kind of quiet you see when a child has dreamed something too real to forget. She cleared her throat gently. "Before we begin," she said, "I want to ask, how is everyone feeling today?" A few nods, one or two shrugs, but one hand rose, then another, and then a voice. "Miss, can we talk about what happened?" A long pause, then another voice, softer. "I keep thinking about it. The eyes, they were so big." Miss Brooks hesitated, then closed the lesson book. The reading exercise would wait. "All right," she said, "let's talk." And so they did. The words came slowly at first, halting, uncertain. Then they poured. Each child recalled something slightly different, but every memory led back to the same impossible moment. They described the shimmer, the disk, the brush of static in the air. They described the being's pale gray skin, long limbs, and the eyes, always the eyes. Some children remembered feeling dizzy. Others recalled a strange calm, as if the world had faded around them. One boy said he didn't hear the wind anymore, as if the entire playground had gone silent. Another girl described the way the figure looked at her, how it felt like being seen, not just with eyes, but with something deeper, something ancient. The classroom was silent as they spoke, the only sound the occasional rustling of leaves outside the open window. Miss Brooks listened without interrupting, her pen forgotten in her hand. In the next room, a similar conversation was unfolding. Mr. Mpu, the science teacher, was usually a man of logic and structure. He believed in facts, but even he could not ignore the chorus of matching voices that recounted the event in precise, unsettling detail. He asked questions, careful ones. How many figures did you see? Where did they come from? What did they do? But the answers were never physical. They looked at me. I felt them in my head. They showed me pictures of the world ending. By the end of the school day, word had spread among the staff. In every classroom, from the littlest ones to the oldest, the story was the same. The strange craft, the beings, the silent communication, the eyes. At lunchtime, the teachers gathered in the staff room, their voices low, their brows drawn. Some were skeptical, a few dismissed it outright. Mass suggestion, imagination, something seen on television. But others, like Miss Brooks, were less certain. They believe it, she said quietly. Whatever it was, they truly believe they saw it. Mr. Vernon, the headmaster, stood by the window, looking out at the playground where the encounter had taken place. The grass still bent in the breeze. The gum trees swayed gently. Nothing looked unusual, but he couldn't shake the unease curling in his chest. "They've drawn pictures," he said at last, "all nearly identical." The staff grew quiet. Doubt still lingered among them, but it was beginning to crack under the weight of something undeniable. Over the next days, the children continued to talk about it, not constantly, but often enough. Some were frightened, others were fascinated. Some asked questions no adult could answer. Were the beings coming back? Why did they choose them? What did they want? And still others said very little at all. One girl, known for her bright personality, had become distant. She sat at her desk, staring out the window, chewing her pencil, her drawings growing darker each day. Blackened skies, broken trees, eyes in the clouds. When asked how she felt, she said only like they're still watching. Parents began to take notice. A few had already contacted the school, asking why their children were having nightmares, why they were afraid of the sky. Others dismissed it entirely, saying, "Children talk, children dream, children lie." But the teachers knew something had happened. Whether it was a shared delusion or something unexplainable, the event had left fingerprints in the minds of the children, smudges of something that couldn't be cleaned away. They had changed. A quiet shift, a shadow that followed them through the corridors, sat beside them in class, and watched from behind their drawings. Outside, the sky stretched wide and unbroken. The air was calm. The birds sang again. But inside the aerial school, the echoes of something strange still clung to the walls. A memory not of fear, but of something older. Something that came silently and left them wondering why us. And perhaps when the night fell and the world slipped into darkness, some of the children would lie awake and ask themselves a quieter question. What if they come back? Chapter 4. Cynthia Hind arrives. A few days passed and still the children whispered. Not all the time and not in the same way, but the event lingered like the scent of rain long after the storm has passed. It slipped into their drawings, into their dreams, into the quiet moments between lessons when their eyes would drift toward the windows and into the distant bush. Whatever they had seen, it hadn't left them. Not really. In the staff room, concern deepened. Teachers debated what should be done. Some urged silence, hoping it would all fade with time. Others insisted that someone outside the school, someone experienced, needed to hear the children to make sense of what had happened. Not the press, not police. Someone different. That someone came quietly. Cynthia Hind arrived on a sunlit morning, her presence calm, steady, and unassuming. She wasn't a stranger to strange things. Known across southern Africa as a veteran investigator of unexplained aerial phenomena, she had spent years listening to accounts of sightings, lights in the sky, encounters told in hushed tones from far-off villages. She was meticulous and kind, with a quiet authority that came from listening more than speaking. She stepped onto the school grounds with a notebook tucked beneath one arm and a warm scarf wrapped loosely around her shoulders. Her gray hair caught the wind as she looked across the field toward the cluster of gum trees at the edge of the playground. This was not her first investigation, but it was perhaps her most important. Inside the school, the teachers greeted her with polite unease. They didn't want media attention. They didn't want fear, but they wanted answers, however faint they might be. Cynthia listened carefully to what they told her. Then she asked gently, "May I speak to the children?" The teachers hesitated. Then slowly they began to call the students in one by one, sometimes in pairs. Each child was given paper, pencils, and time. No pressure, no leading questions. Just draw what you saw. Tell me what happened, and they did. What emerged was extraordinary. Dozens of drawings, eerily similar, filled her folder. The same silver object shaped like a disc or a flattened oval. The same black-suited figures with large heads and haunting almond-shaped eyes. The same setting, gum trees, dry grass, and wide blue sky. There were slight variations in detail, but the core image remained constant, as if they had all watched the same film, etched into memory. But it was the interviews that stayed with her. One boy, no older than 11, sat across from her with nervous fingers and wide eyes. He spoke softly, as if the memory were fragile. "It didn't have wheels," he said, glancing at his drawing. "It didn't land. It just came down and stopped like it was floating." "And the figure?" Cynthia asked. He nodded. "It walked, but not like us. It kind of glided. It looked straight at me. Into me." Another girl with tightly braided hair and tearful eyes told her about the images she saw. Not with her eyes, but in her mind. "It was like pictures," she said. "Flashes. I saw the trees dying, smoke and water, lots of water. But it was rising like a flood. It made me feel sad and scared, like they were warning us." Cynthia made careful notes. Her voice remained calm. Her questions never led too far. She had interviewed many people in her life. Men who claimed to have seen lights over mountains, women who heard humming late at night in their gardens. But this was different. These were children, and their fear was not imagined. What struck her most was their sincerity. There was no sense of performance, no attempt to exaggerate or impress. Their voices were soft, their memories vivid. The fear and awe they described did not sound rehearsed. It felt lived. Over the next day and a half, she spoke to nearly all of them. She asked about where they were standing, who they were with, what they felt. Sometimes she saw their eyes glaze as they described it, as if the memory came not in words but in a flood of emotion they didn't know how to shape. Cynthia returned to the field with one of the older girls. "Show me," she said gently. "Where were they?" The girl pointed. "There, just beyond those trees." They walked slowly across the playground, the grass crunching softly beneath their shoes. The girl pointed again, this time to a patch of scrubland where the grass was slightly flattened, as if something large had pressed down and then vanished. "They stood there," she whispered. "Two of them. One looked at us. The other stayed by the ship." "And what did you feel?" The girl swallowed, like my chest was shaking, but outside like the air was full of something. She hesitated, and I didn't want to move. I didn't want to blink. Cynthia let the silence stretch between them. Later, she returned her notebook, now filled with diagrams, quotes, and hastily scribbled impressions. She felt the story unfolding in fragments like shards of glass slowly falling into place. This wasn't a prank. It wasn't a hoax. Something had touched these children. Whether physical or not, it had left a mark, an imprint deep enough to ripple through the entire school. That night, in her small guest room near the edge of Ruhr, she sat under a ceiling fan that turned with a quiet, ticking rhythm. She reviewed each drawing by candlelight, laying them side by side. The eyes stared back at her, unblinking, black and vast. She did not jump to conclusions. That was never her way. But something had happened here. Something she had never quite seen before. And the children, they were still trying to understand it. Chapter 5. Eyes Beyond the Trees. The days after Cynthia Hines's arrival were filled with soft conversations, whispered recollections, and quiet moments of reflection among the children of Ariel School. The ordinary routines of lessons, playtime, and lunches continued on the surface. But beneath the calm exterior, something far more complex had taken root. A silent understanding that what they had seen was unlike anything they had ever known. Many of the children, when asked what stayed with them most clearly, spoke of the eyes. Not just the shape or color. The eyes themselves seemed to carry a presence, a weight far beyond their size or appearance. They were vast, black, almond-shaped, and unblinking. But they were also deeply knowing, ancient, almost sad, eyes that seemed to look not only at the children, but through them, reaching into places words could not touch. One boy named Tendai, who had watched from the edge of the playground, described it simply. Their eyes were like windows not just to their faces, but to something bigger, like they saw everything, all the trees, the sky, even inside us. Another girl, Patience, spoke quietly of how the eyes made her feel small and vast at the same time. It was like they were telling me stories without saying anything, like memories floating in the air. I couldn't look away, but I wanted to hide. This gaze, intense and strange, seemed to reach beyond physical sight. Several children spoke of feelings, not feelings inside their hearts, but impressions inside their minds. They described a quiet voice that was not spoken aloud, but understood in a way deeper than hearing. A gentle pressure, like a song carried on the wind that filled their heads with images, not words but pictures. Some saw forests ablaze with flames, trees twisting and falling as smoke choked the air. Others saw oceans swelling, rising higher and higher, swallowing the land like a slow dark tide. Some pictured deserts cracking open, the earth bleeding dust and fire. "It was a warning," said Chipo, her voice barely above a whisper. "They showed us the world, but it was breaking." These images did not frighten all the children. Some felt a strange calm amid the chaos, a certainty that the beings wanted to help. They felt as if the beings were reaching out, not to scare or harm, but to share something important, something urgent. The telepathic impressions were not just warnings. They were lessons, messages about balance, about care, about the fragile threads that hold life together. "Don't hurt the earth," one child said, repeating what they felt was being told to them. "Take care. Listen." In the quiet corners of the schoolyard, away from adult eyes, children would gather and share what they remembered. These silent conversations of minds speaking without words, their voices soft with wonder and unease. Teachers noticed a change too. The children seemed more thoughtful, more distant, as if they carried invisible weights. They asked questions about nature, about the stars, about why people fight, and why the earth sometimes seems sick. Some even began to draw, not only the beings but the visions they had seen, the burning forests, the swelling seas, the broken land. Their art became a language for feelings too big for words. At home, parents sometimes heard strange stories, children waking in the night, whispering about the eyes or the pictures, dreams that left them trembling. An urge to protect the world born from something deeper than childhood fancy. Cynthia Hind, observing all of this, felt a mixture of awe and concern. The children's minds had opened a door to something vast and unknown. Whether a glimpse into the future, a plea from another world, or something deeper within the children themselves, she could not say, but she knew this was no ordinary sighting. Outside the school grounds, the landscape stretched wide and wild, untouched by the chaos that the children now carried inside. The tall grasses swayed in the breeze. The gum trees whispered their own ancient stories. The sky arched overhead, calm and endless. And somewhere just beyond the trees, the memory of those wide black eyes lingered, watching, waiting, silent. Chapter 6. John Mack's Arrival. The story of the aerial school encounter did not remain confined to the quiet rural stretches of Rua for long. Whispers spread through channels both official and unseen, reaching ears attentive to the strange and the unexplained. Among those who heard the murmurs was Dr. John Mack, a Harvard psychiatrist known not just for his medical credentials, but for his deep commitment to understanding those who experience extraordinary events. His work with people who had faced the unfathomable, from alien abductions to near-death experiences, was both respected and controversial, marked by empathy rather than skepticism. For Dr. Mack, these were not merely tales of science fiction or fantasy. They were deeply human experiences, reflections of something greater, something that touched the edges of understanding. When the reports from Zimbabwe reached him, he knew that the aerial school children were carrying a story that needed careful attention, not to debunk, not to sensationalize, but to listen. His arrival in Rua was quiet but purposeful. On a golden afternoon, with the sun slanting low over the savannah, he stepped onto the school grounds. The air was warm and filled with the scent of earth and dry grass, the distant hum of insects punctuating the stillness. Children in their green and white uniforms eyed him with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Some clung to their friends, others stared shyly from behind classroom doors. Dr. Mack's presence was calm and unassuming. He wore simple clothes, a light jacket draped over his arm, and carried a small leather-bound notebook. His eyes were soft but observant, carrying an unspoken invitation to trust. He began not with questions, but with silence, an open space for the children to feel safe, to gather their thoughts. Slowly they were coaxed to share their stories in their own words and ways. Some spoke haltingly, their voices trembling with the weight of memory. Others recalled the event with vivid clarity, their expressions as though they were reliving moments just past. What emerged was a tapestry of experience stitched together by the shared sense of wonder and fear. The children spoke of the silver disk that hovered silently beyond the trees, an object that defied all ordinary explanation. They described the beings that stepped out from the craft. Tall, slender figures with skin like pale moonlight and eyes that were impossibly black and vast, shaped like almonds stretched across the face. Those eyes, they said, held something beyond sight, an ancient knowledge, an emotion unspoken. Dr. Mack listened intently as the children described the feelings that had flooded their minds during the encounter. Not words, they said, but images, visions of a world in peril, forests burning, oceans rising, the earth trembling under the weight of unseen wounds. Some recalled a quiet voice within their heads, a silent message carried on the wind urging care, respect, and understanding. He gently asked what these experiences meant to them. The answers were not simple. Many struggled to articulate the depth of what they had felt. Yet there was a shared sense among them of being chosen, not as heroes, but as witnesses, guardians of a message too heavy for words, but too urgent to ignore. Beyond the classroom walls, Dr. Mack also spoke with the teachers and parents, piecing together the ripple effects of the encounter on the children's daily lives. He observed subtle changes, quiet moments of introspection, sudden bursts of anxiety, vivid dreams that left the children restless and fearful. He encouraged open conversations, emphasizing that they were not alone, that their feelings were valid and important. Throughout his days at Ariel School, Dr. Mack moved carefully between observation and compassion. He conducted interviews with patients, often letting the children lead the narrative. He praised their courage for speaking about what many adults would dismiss. His presence became a gentle anchor amid the swirl of uncertainty, a reminder that their experiences mattered. As the sun dipped behind the distant hills each evening, painting the sky with soft hues of pink and lavender, Dr. Mack would sit quietly by the window of his modest room near the school. He would review his notes and drawings, tracing the contours of the black-eyed beings and the shimmering craft that had so profoundly touched the lives of the children. The questions ran deep. What did these beings want? Why had they chosen this small school in Zimbabwe? And how would these memories shape the children's futures? He did not pretend to have answers, but he understood this much. The encounter was not merely a fleeting event, but a profound experience that reached into the very heart of human consciousness. It held a message, one that transcended language, culture, and age. And for the children of Ariel School, Dr. Mack's arrival was a beacon. It told them that their stories were heard, that they were not alone, that the mystery they had witnessed was part of something much larger, something still unfolding, like a quiet song beneath the vast African sky. Chapter 7. Dreams of the Beings. After the days filled with stories, questions, and quiet reflection, a new phase settled over the children of Ariel School. When evening fell and the world softened into twilight, sleep came. But with it, something deeper and more mysterious: dreams. These were not ordinary dreams, the kind that fade like morning mist upon waking. They were vivid, immersive, and often haunting dreams that seemed to extend the encounter beyond the bounds of daylight, carrying echoes of the strange visitation into the silent hours of night. Many of the children awoke in the stillness of their bedrooms, with their hearts racing, their breaths shallow, and their minds heavy with the weight of images that clung stubbornly to their memory. These dreams did not simply flutter past like childhood fancies. They lingered in their consciousness, demanding attention, drawing a quiet tremor beneath their calm exterior. The dreams varied, yet a common thread wove through them all. Some children described drifting silently over vast landscapes bathed in strange light, a mix of darkness and shimmering colors that seemed both alien and familiar. They would find themselves floating above forests ablaze not with fire, but with cold blue flames, their flickering light casting eerie shadows that danced like spirits among the trees. Others spoke of oceans that rose and fell, not with waves of water, but with shifting currents of light and shadow, swallowing land and sky in a slow, luminous tide that defied natural laws. Terari, a gentle girl with wide eyes and quiet strength, recounted one such dream. "In my dream, they were there again," she said softly. "The beings with the black eyes, they didn't speak to me with words, but showed me a world filled with colors and shapes I can't explain. It felt like they were trying to teach me something important, something I have to remember." Many of the children shared similar experiences of silent communication through dreamlike visions. Some saw strange cities shaped like the shimmering disk they had witnessed, towers reaching into starry skies, glowing softly, their surfaces humming with an energy felt rather than heard. Doors opened onto endless voids that sparkled with stars and cosmic light, inviting the dreamer to step beyond reality. Yet for some, the dreams carried an unsettling edge. Shadows lingered just beyond their sight, whispering secrets in a language not spoken aloud, but understood in the quiet folds of the mind. Some children awoke trembling, tears tracing silent paths down their cheeks, while others sat frozen in bed, their chests tight with a fear they could not name. These nights were long and heavy, stretching the limits of their young endurance. Parents began to notice changes. Children who had once slept soundly now stirred in the night, calling out in half-formed words, or sitting awake, eyes wide in the darkness. Teachers observed moments of distraction when children would drift from lessons, their gazes distant and unfocused, as if peering through the walls of the classroom into the realm of their dreams. The dreams became a silent language, a bridge between what the children had seen and what their minds sought to understand. Yet they spoke of these dreams rarely, as if the memories were fragile and private, too precious or too strange to share openly. Dr. John Mack, attuned to the subtleties of the children's experiences, spoke with care about these nocturnal journeys. He explained that the mind often uses dreams to process deep emotions and complex experiences, translating feelings and impressions into images and stories that can be explored safely in sleep. He encouraged the children to welcome their dreams, to see them as a natural part of their unfolding journey rather than a source of fear. Cynthia Hine listened closely to the children's accounts of their dreams, recording details with a quiet reverence. She noticed recurring symbols, the black-eyed beings, the glowing landscapes, the rising seas, and began to see the dreams as threads woven into the broader tapestry of the encounter. To her, they were not random or meaningless, but held significance as messages, lessons, or warnings delivered through the language of the subconscious. As days turned to weeks, the dreams continued with varying intensity. Some nights were filled with calm, luminous visions that left the children waking with a sense of peace and understanding. Others were dark and turbulent, carrying shadows and whispers that unsettled their waking thoughts. The dreams became companions, sometimes guides, sometimes mysteries. The children found ways to express what they saw in their dreams through art and writing. In the quiet corners of the classroom, crayon and pencil sketches began to fill the pages of their notebooks. Forests burning in cold flames, seas glowing with strange light, towering cities beyond human comprehension. These images became a language of their own, bridging the gap between the known and the unknown, the waking and the dreaming. At home, families noticed a subtle shift as well. Conversations changed, filled with questions about the stars, the earth, and the meaning of life. Some children spoke of a responsibility they felt, an urgent call to care for the world, to listen and act before it was too late. These were not childish fancies, but deep convictions that seemed to grow from the seeds planted by the encounter and nurtured in the dreamscape. Outside, the African night sky stretched vast and unbroken, stars shining like distant eyes watching over the earth. The wind whispered through the branches of the gum trees, carrying with it the quiet pulse of the world, alive, fragile, waiting. In the bedrooms of Rua, beneath the vast canopy of stars, children drifted in and out of sleep, their minds journeying through landscapes of light and shadow. They carried in their dreams the mysteries of the beings beyond the trees, silent watchers, messengers from worlds unknown, and the gentle keepers of secrets that only the night could hold. Chapter 8. The wider community reacts. As the weeks passed after the encounter at Ariel School, the quiet ripple it caused began to spread beyond the boundaries of the small village of Ruhr. What had been whispered among children and teachers started to reach the ears of parents, local officials, and eventually the wider community. Like a slow-growing wave, The story of the strange craft and the black-eyed beings stirred curiosity, concern, and confusion among many who had never set foot near the schoolyard. At first, the reactions were cautious and muted. Parents grappled with disbelief, unsure how to interpret their children's stories. Some dismissed them as childhood fantasies or overactive imaginations, while others grew worried about the nightmares and fears their children were experiencing. Mothers held their little ones close at night, trying to soothe trembling hands and wide eyes, whispering reassurances even when they themselves felt uncertain. In the classrooms, teachers did their best to maintain a sense of normalcy. They guided the children gently through their lessons, but the encounter was never far from anyone's mind. Miss Brooks often found herself staring out the window, thinking of the strange visitors and the message carried in their gaze. The weight of responsibility settled heavier with each passing day. Meanwhile, news of the event began to spread through the surrounding villages and towns. People spoke in hushed tones at markets and community gatherings. Some were skeptical, others fascinated. Stories became embellished, details altered with each retelling. Yet the core, an extraordinary visitation witnessed by children, remained. Local newspapers soon caught wind of the incident, though their coverage was cautious and often tinged with doubt. Headlines spoke of unexplained sightings at Ruhr School or strange visitor sparks fear and wonder. Reporters came and went, asking questions, seeking interviews. Yet the children remained protected by their parents and teachers, shielded from the glare of public scrutiny. The arrival of Cynthia Hind and Dr. John Mack added layers of seriousness to the story. Their presence signaled that this was not simply a passing tale, but a phenomenon worthy of careful investigation and respect. Both women approached the community with sensitivity, listening to fears and hopes alike, weaving a delicate balance between inquiry and compassion. Yet not all reactions were gentle. Some community members expressed fear or suspicion. Rumors began to swirl. Was this some form of witchcraft? A bad omen? Whispers of government cover-ups and foreign spies spread through the grapevine. The unknown bred anxiety, and some sought to distance themselves from the school, wary of what might linger in the air. Amid the swirling emotions, a sense of unity also emerged. The children's experiences had become a shared mystery, something that bound the community together in unexpected ways. Meetings were held to discuss how to support the children and each other. Teachers and parents worked to create spaces where questions could be asked without judgment, where fear could be met with understanding. At night under the wide African sky, elders told stories of old, tales of spirits and visitors from the stars, of watchers who had come long ago to warn and protect. These stories passed down through generations, took on new meaning in light of the recent events. The encounter was woven into the fabric of local folklore, a new chapter in an ancient tapestry. For the children, the community's reactions were a mixed blessing. They felt both seen and misunderstood. Some found comfort in the support. Others struggled with the weight of attention and the whispering voices beyond their classroom walls. Yet through it all, they held fast to the memories of the beings, their silent messages and watchful eyes. The wider world beyond Ruhr had begun to turn its gaze toward this small school in Zimbabwe. And the story of the aerial school encounter was no longer just a secret whispered beneath the gum trees. It was a question posed to the skies, a mystery that lingered like the soft rustle of leaves in the night. Chapter 9. The Question of Reality. In the quiet moments following the initial surge of reactions, a deeper question began to take root among many who heard the story from aerial school. What was real? The children's vivid memories, the drawings, the dreams. They all painted a picture so extraordinary it challenged everything known about the world. Yet reality, as most understood it, did not easily bend to accommodate tales of silent beings with black eyes and shimmering crafts that defied physics. Parents and teachers grappled with this unsettling tension. How does one explain to a child that what they saw might not be real without invalidating their fear and wonder? How could the adults reconcile the children's stories with their own experiences, which knew no place for such encounters? The question of reality was not only a matter of belief, but of perception. It beckoned the community and even distant observers to reconsider what the boundaries of experience truly were. Dr. John Mack, with his years of studying extraordinary human experiences, approached this question with a rare sensitivity. He understood that reality is often more complex than the physical world we see. In his work with people who had encountered the inexplicable, he found that these experiences held deep psychological and spiritual significance, regardless of their external explanation. He gently reminded those around him that dismissing the children's stories outright could be harmful. Instead, he encouraged openness to listen, to learn, and to consider that reality might include dimensions not yet fully understood by science. The children themselves often sensed this ambiguity. Some asked if their memories were real or just dreams. Others wondered if the beings had been watching them through the trees or if it had all been an elaborate imagination. Their questions reflected a natural desire to ground their experience in something tangible, something that could be shared and understood. Teachers found themselves navigating these uncertain waters carefully. They encouraged the children to express their feelings and doubts without fear of judgment. Reality, they said gently, is often shaped by what we believe and what we feel. What matters is how these experiences change us, what they teach us about ourselves and the world. Outside the classrooms and homes, the question of reality stirred broader conversations. In nearby towns and cities, discussions began in cafes and community centers about the nature of existence, consciousness, and the universe. Some dismissed the encounter as a fabrication or a collective hallucination, a product of fear and imagination. Others embraced it as a genuine glimpse into a larger, stranger cosmos. The media coverage, cautious but persistent, fueled debates. Experts in psychology, astronomy, and folklore weighed in. Some spoke of mass hysteria or suggestibility among children. Others highlighted the consistency and sincerity of the accounts, proposing that perhaps something extraordinary had indeed occurred. Among the community, a spectrum of beliefs and opinions emerged. Skeptics, believers, agnostics, all grappling with what to make of the events. Yet for many, the story of Ariel School was not just about proof or disbelief. It was about the profound impact these experiences had on the children's lives and the community's collective consciousness. As night fell over Rua and the stars once again blanketed the sky, the question of reality remained open, an invitation rather than an answer. The children's memories, the whispered warnings, the dreams of distant worlds, all lingered in the quiet spaces between knowing and wondering. And in those spaces, the mystery endured, waiting patiently for those willing to look beyond the familiar, to embrace the possibility that reality might be far more vast, strange, and beautiful than anyone had ever imagined. Chapter 10: The Lasting Legacy. In the months and years that followed the encounter at Ariel School, the story settled into the collective memory of Ruhr and beyond, weaving itself into a tapestry of quiet mystery and gentle wonder. Though the immediate shock had faded, its echoes lingered, ripples across time and space that touched lives in subtle but profound ways. For the children who had witnessed the strange craft and the beings with those deep black eyes, life continued, but nothing was quite the same. The encounter became a quiet companion, a secret held in the chambers of their hearts. It shaped how they saw the world and themselves, imbuing their days with a sense of connection to something larger, something beyond the ordinary. Some of the children carried a newfound empathy and a deeper awareness of the earth and its fragile balance. Their dreams and visions became gentle reminders of the responsibility they bore, not as heroes or saviors, but as caretakers of a planet whispered to them by visitors from the stars. In classrooms and homes, conversations grew richer with questions about nature, the universe, and the unseen forces that bind us all. Cynthia Hind and Dr. John Mack remained silent witnesses and guides, their work helping to preserve the children's stories with care and respect. Their presence validated the experience, offering a bridge between the extraordinary and the everyday, between mystery and understanding. The documents, drawings, and recordings they collected became invaluable records of a moment when the veil between worlds seemed to thin. The wider world, too, took notice. The Ariel School encounter became a landmark case in the study of close encounters. Researchers, ufologists, and scholars visited Ruhr, hoping to understand what had happened and why. Many were struck not only by the event itself, but by the grace and sincerity of the children's testimony, a testament to innocence, meeting the unknown with bravery and openness. Yet, beyond the scientific and investigative interest, the encounter left a spiritual imprint. It touched on the deepest questions of existence: who we are, where we come from, and what it means to be connected across the vastness of the cosmos. The story invited people everywhere to consider the possibility that we are not alone, that the universe is teeming with life and wisdom waiting to be discovered. In the community of Rua, the encounter became part of local law, spoken of in reverent tones by elders and children alike. It was a story told under the stars, a reminder that the world is filled with wonders, both seen and unseen. The children who had once been frightened now grew into adults who carried the legacy forward. Teachers, artists, scientists, and dreamers inspired by their brush with the extraordinary. Some found themselves drawn to the study of the skies, becoming astronomers who searched for distant worlds and signals beyond our solar system. Others turned to the arts, expressing through music, painting, and writing the ineffable feelings stirred by that moment of contact. Many dedicated themselves to environmental causes, motivated by the urgent messages glimpsed in dreams and visions to protect the Earth's delicate balance. The encounter also influenced those who had not been present, those who heard the story from afar and felt a stirring in their own hearts. It became a beacon for those who seek meaning in the unknown, a symbol of hope that connection and understanding might be possible across vast distances of space and time. As decades passed, the aerial school encounter was remembered not only as an event, but as a legacy, a gentle reminder that the universe holds mysteries that call us to listen, to learn, and to care. It reminded humanity that we are part of a larger story, one that unfolds with quiet wonder beneath the endless sky. And so beneath the great canopy of stars that watched over Ruhr and the world beyond, the legacy of that day lived on. In the dreams of children, in the whispered memories of those who were there, and in the hearts of all who dare to imagine what lies beyond the horizon. If you're still awake, you're in for something a little different. Now, here are some eerie, lesser-known UFO encounters from around the world. Strange events, quiet sightings, and unsettling moments reported by ordinary people. Tales that never made the headlines but left deep impressions on those who lived them. You're safe here. Just listen and drift as the mysteries unfold. Story 1. The Nameless Farm. It was a cold November evening in 1974, just outside the wooded hills of rural Pennsylvania. A small family farm tucked away on the edge of the Appalachian foothills was settling in for the night. The father, Harold, had just finished locking up the barn. His wife and 2 children were already inside, their dinner finished, the fire crackling low. Outside, the wind whispered through bare branches. As Harold stepped back toward the house, he paused. The air felt still, too. No crickets, no wind. The quiet had weight to it. Then he heard it. A low, resonant hum like a distant engine, but deeper. It vibrated in his chest more than his ears. He scanned the sky, expecting to see a helicopter, or perhaps a low-flying plane. But there was nothing. Just a cloudless sky and the crescent moon hanging pale and thin. Then the lights came. First one, then 2, then a ring of them, hovering above the old wooden barn. They glowed softly at first, white with a bluish tinge, and then began to pulse one by one around the edges of something he couldn't quite make out. The craft was perfectly silent. It hovered no more than 30 feet above the barn roof. Slowly, rhythmically, a beam of pale light stretched downward like a slow-moving searchlight. Harold froze. He couldn't move. He couldn't call out. His breath hung in the air, but his limbs wouldn't respond. It was as if time had slowed, or he had been pinned to the earth by something unseen. Inside the house, his wife stood up from the living room window. She had seen the lights too. She called out to Harold, but he didn't answer. She grabbed a flashlight and flung the door open. But the moment she stepped outside, the power went out. Lights, heat, all that gone in an instant. She stood on the porch, her flashlight flickering weakly, casting more shadow than light. The air smelled strange, like metal or ozone. The only illumination came from the glowing object above the barn. She watched in horror as the beam scanned across the ground, then lingered right where the cow pen stood, and then it was gone. No sound, no rush of wind, just darkness. Power returned a few minutes later, as if nothing had happened. But in the morning, the cows were missing. All of them. No broken fences, no blood, no signs of panic, just empty pens and strange blackened circles in the grass. The ground was dry, but one section near the barn was scorched. The metal water trough had been warped as if exposed to immense heat. Yet the barn itself was untouched. The police filed the report, but there wasn't much they could do. No tracks, no suspects, just a shaken family with a story no one wanted to believe. The farm dog refused to go near the barn for weeks. The grass never grew back in the scorched area. Harold never quite recovered. He grew quiet, withdrawn. He sold the farm the following spring, moving his family into town, far from the place he once called home. When asked what happened that night, he would only shake his head and say, "Some things ain't meant for us to understand." Over time, the story faded. Locals called it a tall tale. Kids whispered about the ghost barn in the woods. But those who knew Harold knew he wasn't the kind of man to make things up, and his wife, quiet and practical, refused to talk about it at all. To this day, the new owners of the land say they've seen nothing strange, but if you walk past the old barn late at night, you might still hear the faint hum in the distance and wonder what came to visit the nameless farm on that cold November night. Story 2. The Red-Eyed Watcher. It was early March, still deep winter in the forests of northern Finland. Snow blanketed the ground in a thick, silent layer, and the sky hung low with heavy clouds. The air was cold enough to sting the lungs, but that didn't stop Karvi, a 38-year-old postal worker, from taking his usual walk through the pine woods near Roven. He liked the solitude, the hush of the snow, the soft crunch of his boots on the forest path. The old pines with their dark, twisted limbs stood tall and silent all around him. That night there was no wind, just the occasional creak of branches under the weight of snow. He walked with his hands deep in his coat pockets, breath fogging out in steady puffs. Then he saw something ahead. At first it looked like a tree trunk in the middle of the path, but as he drew closer, he realized it was too smooth, too tall. It didn't move, didn't sway. It simply stood there, silent and still. He stopped. The figure was roughly 7 feet tall, with a narrow frame, and skin so pale it almost glowed against the dark trees. Its limbs were thin, and its head was elongated, slightly tilted. But it was the eyes that froze him, large, completely black, and glowing faintly red from within. They stared at him without blinking. Karvi's body refused to move. He felt no fear, at least not at first, just confusion, curiosity, a kind of dreamlike paralysis. His breathing slowed. Time stretched. The figure didn't approach. It didn't gesture. It just watched. Then it slowly raised its left arm, not threateningly, just deliberately, and pointed into the woods beside him. Karvi turned to look, half expecting to see something, or someone, but there was only darkness and trees. When he looked back, the figure was gone. No sound, no footsteps, no wind, just a faint warmth in the air, as if a stove had been burning nearby. He waited for minutes, maybe more, before his body allowed him to move again. He turned around and walked straight home, never looking back. For weeks afterward, he suffered from vivid, almost feverish dreams. He'd wake up drenched in sweat with fragments of memories that didn't feel like his own. Tall hallways made of metal, lights that pulsed without source, a low hum he could feel in his teeth. He developed sudden nosebleeds, headaches, static shocks from every surface. He didn't tell anyone at first, not until years later after reading similar stories online. Stories of watchers, figures with glowing red eyes appearing in isolated areas, silently observing. He found others who had seen the same thing, though scattered across the world, separated by decades. No one had answers, only questions. Kalevi moved to the city a year after the sighting. He never walked that trail again. And though he told himself he'd imagined it, that it was the cold or fatigue or some trick of the light, he never forgot the eyes, the pale figure, the gesture toward the trees, the stillness of it all. He sometimes wonders what might have happened if he'd followed where it pointed, what lay in the woods just beyond his line of sight. But some part of him is glad he didn't find out, because whatever it was, it had been waiting and watching. Story 3, The Churchyard Lights. It was late summer in Dorset, England, the kind of warm, damp August evening where the sky hangs pink for hours and the air carries the scent of hay and distant sea salt. In the village of Charminster, life moved slowly and nights were quiet, peaceful. That summer, though, something strange began to happen in the old churchyard. It started with a farmer on his way home after dusk. He passed the stone wall of the church just as the sun was slipping below the hills, and as he glanced toward the rows of crooked gravestones, he saw something that stopped him in his tracks. A soft blue light hovering in the air above one of the graves. It shimmered faintly like moonlight on water. And then just as quickly, it blinked out. He told no one, but a few nights later, two schoolboys sneaking out with torches saw the lights too, several of them drifting among the gravestones like fireflies. They were silent, glowing pale blue, moving too slowly and too deliberately to be insects or tricks of the eye. The boys approached, their footsteps crunching softly on the gravel path. The lights didn't vanish. They simply floated, waiting. One of the boys said later he heard something, a whisper, a voice, not quite human, saying words he didn't understand. The other boy fainted where he stood. When he came to, he couldn't remember what he'd heard, only that he felt, watched, judged. Within days, more sightings followed. The local vicar saw the lights through his office window and refused to speak of it again. A retired nurse walking her dog swore she saw one of the lights pass straight through a stone cross. Her dog barked wildly, then whimpered for days. The lights came only at night, always blue, always hovering, always silent. Then one evening, a curious amateur photographer from the next town set up a camera in the churchyard, hoping to capture what so many had described. He waited for hours. Nothing. Not a flicker. Until just before midnight, suddenly his camera powered off, completely drained. The air felt heavy. The silence became oppressive, and then the lights came. He later told a local reporter he'd seen at least 5 orbs, each about the size of a grapefruit, moving together in a pattern that felt almost intelligent. They circled the central gravestone, pulsing softly as if communicating. Then one by one they lifted into the air and disappeared straight upward. No sound, no trail, just gone. After that night, the lights were never seen again. The churchyard returned to its quiet slumber, its gravestones mossy and undisturbed. The villagers slowly stopped talking about it, as if by mutual agreement, the events of that August were left to drift quietly into memory. But if you walk by the church on a late summer night and the mist clings low to the ground, some say you might still feel the hair rise on the back of your neck, a presence just out of sight. And if you listen closely, you might hear the faint hum of something old, something watching, and something that once called the dead to glow. Story 4. The Silent Convoy. It was a cloudless night in early spring, and the sky over eastern Montana stretched wide and black, speckled with stars. A long-haul trucker named Dave was hauling a load of industrial pipe across the plains, riding the quieter state routes to avoid the interstate traffic. It was just after midnight, no towns for miles, only the steady hum of the wheels beneath him and the static of the CB. He'd driven this stretch many times before, but that night something felt different. His headlights illuminated only empty road ahead. Rolling grassland on either side. No other cars, no moon, just the glow of the dash and the shape of the land rolling away into dark nothing. Then without warning, the radio cut out. No static, no fade, just silence. At first, Dave assumed the radio had simply failed. He tapped it, checked the antenna. But then, he noticed something stranger. The lights on his dash were flickering, his speedometer wavered, dipping suddenly. The truck's engine coughed, then continued as if nothing had happened. He slowed the rig, eyes sweeping the sky. That's when he saw them. 3 black triangles flying low almost directly above the road. Each one was massive, maybe the size of a city block, flat, smooth, with soft white lights on each corner. They moved in perfect formation, slow, silent, impossibly silent. No engine, no wind disturbance, just a heavy presence above. He pulled over and stepped out of the cab. The air felt wrong. Thick, still, electric, like a thunderstorm that never came. The 3 craft hovered steadily above the road, maybe a few 100 feet up, slowly gliding forward. No flashing lights, no markings, just geometry and motion. Dave stood frozen. He couldn't tell how long he watched. Minutes, maybe more. There was a strange feeling in his chest, like pressure. Not pain, just weight. Then everything changed. He blinked and suddenly he was driving. The truck was in motion. The road signs had changed. The sky had lightened slightly as if an hour had passed. The radio was still dead, but the dash lights were back to normal. His coffee, still half full in the cup holder, was now cold. He checked his GPS. He was 31 miles further than he remembered being, and he couldn't recall a single second of it. His dash cam, which he always ran at night, was still recording. But when he checked the footage at a truck stop later that morning, there was a glitch. At the exact time he saw the triangles, the video scrambled, static distortion, and then resumed with him already on the highway again, miles down the road. He didn't report it, didn't call it in, didn't tell his dispatcher, but a week later he received an anonymous email with no message, just a file. Inside was an edited version of his dash cam footage, except this version showed the three triangles clearly floating above the road, framed in perfect darkness. He never found out who sent it. He deleted it the next day. He didn't want to know more. Some nights when he drives along stretches of quiet road, Dave looks up at the stars and wonders how many others have seen them too. Craft that move like shadows, engines that make no sound, time that slips without notice, and always that heavy silence that seems to follow them. Story 5, The Glass Forest. Deep in the frozen wilderness of central Siberia lies a stretch of forest that to this day no one willingly enters. The locals call it Metalales, the dead wood, but its real name was lost long ago. In February of 1976, a Soviet geology team ventured into this forest to study a patch of land where compasses spun uncontrollably and radio signals failed. They were used to cold, used to isolation, but they were not prepared for what they found. The trees changed without warning. At first, they were typical Siberian pines, tall and thick. Then about 20 kilometers in, the forest shifted. The trees became pale, almost colorless, bark smooth as marble. No birds, no sound. The snow underfoot grew brittle with a faint greenish tint, and then the glass began. Stretching across the forest floor in scattered shards were what looked like panes of melted glass, smooth, rippling, some clear, others stained with rainbow hues. The trees in this zone were warped, bent away from a central point as though something massive had exploded without fire. At the center of it all was a perfect circle about 60 feet wide. No snow, no ice, no debris, just scorched soil fused into a plate of black glass. No footprints inside it, no animals, nothing. The instruments the team brought refused to work. Batteries drained in seconds. Cameras jammed, metal warped. One of the team's compasses spun so violently it shattered its casing. One man, Vadim, stepped into the circle before anyone could stop him. The air inside shimmered slightly. He called out, but his voice didn't echo. He waved, but his silhouette appeared slightly wrong, like a film reel out of sync. He smiled and walked further in. Then he vanished. No flash, no sound, just gone. The team ran forward, but as soon as they reached the edge, all but one were struck with sudden nausea and dizziness. One man collapsed and vomited. Another began bleeding from his nose. They dragged each other back out of the forest. A rescue team arrived 2 days later, but the circle was gone. Where the scorched glass had been, there was now only fresh snow and straight, unbroken trees. No sign of the geological team's campsite, no glass, no warped metal. Vadim was never found. The official report listed him as lost to terrain conditions, but the rest of the team never returned to fieldwork. Several developed rare cancers within a year. Years later, satellite photos of the area would show strange heat signatures even in the dead of winter. Perfect circles of warmth with no source, always shifting, never staying in one place for more than a few days. And in the quiet corners of Russian folklore, some whisper that the forest is not dead, but watching that, it remembers that something fell there long ago, something not meant for this world. They say if you go deep enough, the trees start to bend again. The snow grows glassy, the air begins to hum, and if you find the circle, you may not come back. Story 6, The Lake Visitor. Lac Saint Jean sits in the northern stretches of Quebec, wide and still and deep. The kind of lake that holds its silence well. Surrounded by pine forests and long, narrow roads, it's the perfect place to disappear into nature or into something else entirely. In the summer of 2003, a group of 4 campers set up their tents along the lake's southern edge. They were in their 20s, students on a break, looking to escape the city. The air was crisp, the water clear, and the sky cloudless. They built a fire, cooked sausages, laughed into the dark. It was after midnight when they noticed the lake had gone unnaturally still. No wind, no lapping water. The fire hissed as the breeze vanished completely. Then the light came. Above the lake, hovering maybe 100 feet above the water, was a massive oval-shaped object. It didn't flash. It didn't buzz. It simply existed there in the sky, quiet and steady, as if it had always been. Its surface was metallic, but with no seams, smooth like a stone worn by centuries. Lights ringed its center, glowing faintly in colors they couldn't quite describe, somewhere between violet and green, shifting without pattern. The campers stood silent. None of them reached for a phone or flashlight. They just stared. Then one of them, Marianne, pointed. There, directly beneath the craft, a shape stood on the surface of the lake, a figure still upright, standing not in the water, but on it. It was tall, taller than any person should be, and slender. Its limbs hung low. Its skin appeared pale, almost bluish in the reflected light. No face could be seen, no features, just the form of something not human, yet not entirely alien to the imagination either. The fire popped loudly behind them, and when they turned back to the lake, the craft was gone, and so was the figure. The silence lingered. The water still didn't move. One camper whispered that he'd stopped breathing during the sighting, only realizing it when his chest ached. They didn't sleep that night. In the morning, they packed up quickly. No one wanted to admit it out loud, but they all felt it. The air hadn't gone back to normal. The lake no longer felt safe. Back home, they searched online. There were no official reports, no news stories, but buried in obscure forums and translated threads. They found similar accounts going back decades of silent crafts over remote lakes in Quebec and figures that watched from the water's surface. Marianne never went camping again. Story 7, The Shepherd's Story. The Scottish Highlands are a land of wind and silence. Rolling moors stretch endlessly, broken only by the occasional stone wall, a grazing sheep, or a distant glint of low. In the spring of 1958, an old shepherd named Ewan McNeil tended his flock near Glen Lyon, one of the quietest and least traveled valleys in the region. Ewan lived alone in a modest stone cottage with his border collie Bramble. He was a man of few words, grounded in routine and superstition, like many Highlanders of the time. His days were spent among the hills, his nights by the fire, and his only companions were his sheep and the ever-changing sky. One evening just after sunset, Ewan noticed something strange. A section of sky above the far hill had turned a shade of deep amber, unnatural, glowing faintly even as the rest of the horizon faded to black. He watched for several minutes, expecting it to fade, but it didn't. The light hovered, then began to move slowly, deliberately. As it drifted closer, Ewan could make out its shape. A tall vertical structure, like a pillar of light, floating silently just above the ground, following the curve of the hills. It cast no shadow. It gave off no heat, just an eerie, pulsing presence. Bramble growled low, fur bristling, eyes fixed on the shape. Then the sheep began to move. Not run, but walk in a tight, unnatural circle, as if something was pulling them gently, like a current. Ewan tried to call to them, but his voice seemed to fall flat in the air. No echo, no wind, just the silent turning of woolly backs. Then he saw them figures, 3, maybe 4, standing near the pillar, tall, slender, unmoving. They wore no clothes, yet their bodies didn't look human. Smooth, thin, with elongated heads and no visible eyes. Just a shimmering, reflective surface where their faces should have been, like living mirrors. Ewan could not move. He later said it felt like standing inside a deep dream. A part of him knew he was watching something beyond the world he knew, and yet he felt calm. Not welcome, but not afraid either. The figures turned in perfect synchrony and stepped back into the pillar. It rose slowly, silently into the air, then blinked out with no sound at all. The sky went black. The sheep stopped circling. Bramble sat down, trembling. Ewan didn't sleep that night. He returned to town the next day to report what he'd seen. Few believed. Story 8. The Signal over Sinai. The Sinai Peninsula is a place of ancient silence. Sand stretches endlessly, broken by jagged mountains and deep starlit skies. In 1982, during a Layal and regional conflict, a team of Egyptian communication specialists was stationed at a remote outpost near the Jebel Musa range, far from cities, surrounded only by desert wind. They were tasked with monitoring radio transmissions across the region. Most nights were routine, static, coded chatter, the hum of long-distance frequencies. But one night, something unusual began to bleed into their monitors. At exactly 2:13 a.m., every channel went dead. No static, no interference, just silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy. Then one of the men, Adele, noticed a frequency active that wasn't on their list. An unmarked band, narrow, clean. He adjusted the dials carefully and leaned in. A low pulse like a heartbeat through metal. Then a voice, but not a language they recognized. Not Arabic, not English. Something else, rhythmic, tonal, layered with an almost melodic hum. As they listened, the temperature in the small monitoring hut dropped. The lights flickered and, above the desert outside, something appeared. They described it as a long, dark spindle, slowly rotating, not quite touching the ground, yet not high in the sky either. It hovered between mountain peaks, its surface matte and seamless. No lights, no windows, just shape. One man walked outside and began muttering, not in Arabic, but something none of them could understand. His eyes were unfocused, his steps uncertain. When they brought him back inside, he collapsed and slept for 12 hours. The signal continued for precisely 33 minutes. Then it stopped and the stars above the outpost shifted. It wasn't obvious at first, but several men swore the stars had moved slightly, as if space itself had been stretched and released. One technician reported that all his watches were now off by exactly 7 seconds. The next day, their commanding officer ordered their recordings destroyed, but one man, Adele, kept a copy. Years later, he played the signal for a visiting French researcher who specialized in rare languages. The researcher reportedly went pale halfway through. He said the tones matched no human dialect, but carried the exact mathematical intervals of high-level code, like a signal meant to teach or test. Adele never played the tape again. The researcher left the next day without finishing his study. Story 9. The Fog Station, Maine, 1969. Along the jagged coast of Maine, where the Atlantic crashes against black rocks and mist rolls in thick from the sea, there once stood an isolated weather station. Just outside the town of Machiasport, it sat on a cliff edge, an aging structure of metal and glass manned by 2 technicians on rotating shifts. In the fall of 1969, the station was operated by a man named Walter Hensley, a former Navy meteorologist who preferred solitude to society. His assignment was simple: monitor barometric changes and transmit twice daily reports to a research center inland. But one night, a strange fog arrived. It came in sudden, unnaturally fast. One moment the moon was casting a silver line across the ocean. The next it was gone. Visibility dropped to nothing. Radios crackled, static hummed through the walls, and then the lights failed. Walter fumbled for backup power. The generator clicked on, but the station sensors refused to boot. Every dial spun, every display blinked random symbols. Then through the thick glass of the observation window, he saw it, something hovering just above the sea. A sphere, smooth, metallic, perfectly still. It glowed faintly with a bluish hue, the kind of light that didn't reflect off the water but sank into it. It hovered for what seemed like minutes, silent, watching. Walter recorded it in his log by hand, noting every minute. But when he tried to use the radio to report it, all he heard was a low modulated tone. Not a buzz, not static, but a pulse. He stood at the window transfixed. Then from the fog came a shape, a human shape, but too tall. Its silhouette shimmered slightly, like heat above a flame. It moved toward the station slowly, steadily through fog that never parted. Walter backed away from the glass. The figure paused just 10 feet from the door. Then everything stopped. The fog evaporated in seconds. The light vanished. The sensors rebooted and the station was silent again, like nothing had happened. But Walter wasn't the same. He left his post the next morning, never returned. His written logs were found intact, but the final page was odd. Dozens of hand-sketched circles, each one shaded differently, each marked with an identical note. Not fog, not sea, not alone. Local fishermen say the fog still comes that fast sometimes, and when it does, the gulls go quiet. Story 10. The Passenger in Seat 33A over the Pacific. 1997. In December of 1997, Flight 815, a commercial red-eye traveling from Tokyo to Los Angeles, was halfway over the Pacific when the cabin lights dimmed for the night. Most passengers were asleep. Outside, the world was nothing but clouds and black ocean. Seat 33A was a window seat near the rear of the aircraft. A man named Daniel Pierce sat there, returning from a business trip. Unable to sleep, he was reading a dog-eared paperback when he noticed something strange outside the window. A light, but it wasn't a star. It was closer, far too close. It moved alongside the plane, perfectly matched in speed. A glowing sphere, dull orange in color, like heated metal. It pulsed gently, not blinking, but breathing. And as Daniel stared, he realized it wasn't the only one. 3 more appeared in formation, triangular, silent. They flew just below the wing level, far too close for another aircraft. But there was no turbulence, no sound, no alarm. The cabin remained quiet. Then came the hum. Low, deep, like it came from within his own chest. He looked around. No one else stirred. Not the flight attendants, not the other passengers. It was as if time had slowed. The lights outside the window began to shift, not in shape but in color. Soft gradients of red and violet, impossible to describe. And then between the lights he saw it. A figure just for a moment. It was seated beside him, tall, unmoving, expressionless. Its skin was smooth and pale, and its eyes, if they were eyes, reflected no light. It didn't turn to him. It didn't speak. But Daniel felt a word enter his mind anyway, clear as if whispered in his ear. Observe. He blinked and everything was back. Cabin lights, snoring passengers, flight attendants moving through the aisle. The lights outside were gone. Daniel reached for his book, but it was closed with a bookmark tucked into a page he hadn't reached yet. When the plane landed, he didn't speak to anyone. But later, while checking his seat number on the boarding stub, he noticed something odd. Flight 815 had no seat 33A. The row ended at 32. There was no record of his seat ever existing. He never flew again, and sometimes, even years later, he'd wake in the middle of the night with a pressure in his ears and a soft word still echoing in his head. Observe. Story 11. The Moonlit House, Argentina, 1989. In the quiet hills of Córdoba province, Argentina, where dirt roads wind through tall grass and power lines fade into the horizon, there once stood a house at the edge of an empty field. It had belonged to the Velasco family for generations, a modest farmhouse with a red tin roof and an old windmill that creaked in the breeze. By 1989, only Rosa Velasco remained. A retired school teacher in her 70s, she lived simply, keeping a garden, a few chickens, and her black dog, Mateo. She felt safe in her solitude until one night in early spring. It began with a sound, not loud, but sharp, like static from an old radio. Rosa was in bed, drifting off, when she heard it. She sat up and Mateo growled from the foot of the bed. Outside, the moon was nearly full. She pulled back the curtain and saw lights, flickering orbs just above the field. Not lanterns, not headlights. They moved with strange fluid precision, gliding, weaving as if searching. She opened the back door quietly. Then she noticed something else. Her garden was glowing. A bluish light rose from the soil, casting long, odd shadows across the fence. The air felt heavy like the moment before lightning. Then she saw them. 2 figures, thin, taller than men, their skin pale, gray-blue like polished stone. They stood beyond the vegetables, perfectly still. Rosa froze. Mateo didn't bark. He only whimpered low and frightened. The figure said nothing, but Rosa felt something. A thought, maybe a memory that wasn't hers, a street she'd never seen, a voice she didn't recognize. Then the windmill stopped turning. The orbs blinked out one by one. The figures turned, moving in unison, and walked into the tall grass. The light faded, the air returned. The next morning everything seemed normal, except for one vine that had grown over a meter overnight. Its tomato was warm to the touch, ripe beyond reason. She told no one. Years later, neighbors spoke of strange lights near the property. Some heard static by the windmill, and long after Rosa passed, the house was found with its door wide open. No sign of damage or theft, just one overripe tomato sitting on the kitchen table, still warm. Story 12. The Lost Time of Dr. Ari, Finland, 1974. In the winter of 1974, Dr. Simo Ilari, a physicist from Helsinki, traveled north for a solo retreat. He rented a cabin near Lake Inari, deep in Lapland's snow-covered wilderness. The cabin had no electricity, just a fireplace, a kerosene lamp, and a radio for weather reports. Ari wasn't there to rest. He brought notebooks, hoping the isolation would help him concentrate. Each day he hiked the frozen lake's edge. Each night he worked beside the fire. On the sixth evening, just after dusk, a strange hum began. It didn't come from the radio. It vibrated through the floor, through the walls, low, steady, almost musical. He stepped outside, expecting a snowmobile in the distance, but there was only silence. Then he saw it. Hovering high above the frozen lake was a pale disk of light, not spinning, not blinking. It floated motionless, its glow soft and cold. The light didn't cast shadows. It shimmered on the snow like moonlight beneath water. Then the hum stopped. No wind, no sound. Even the cold seemed distant, suspended. Ilari looked at his watch, a mechanical one he wound every night. The second hand had frozen. The disk tilted slightly, then pulsed with a single flash of white light. He blinked, and it was morning. The fire had gone out. His tea kettle was cold. 2 days had passed. The date on his calendar had moved forward, but he remembered nothing. His boots were wet, as if he'd been walking through snow. His journal was open to a new page, one he hadn't written. Curved symbols stretched across the paper in neat rows. At the bottom, a small circle divided by a wave. Ari left that same day. He never spoke publicly about what happened, but colleagues noticed something shift. He abandoned his research in theoretical physics, turned instead to sound, to resonance. In letters, he mentioned a theory he called harmonic displacement. No one ever understood it. He died in 1993. The cabin was sold. The journal was still on the shelf. The strange page remained. Years later, a local skier claimed to see a dull ring of light hovering above the lake. He said it made no sound, but when he looked at his watch, 5 minutes had disappeared. Story 13. The Lights Beneath Loch Mar, Scotland, 2001. Loch Morar is one of the deepest bodies of fresh water in Europe, cold, dark, and largely untouched. Tucked into the western highlands of Scotland, it's a place of fog and stone, where the hills fall steep into the loch's glassy surface. Legends of a monster called Morag have lingered for centuries, but in 2001, something even stranger may have stirred beneath the water. Duncan Fraser, a forestry worker from Fort William, spent most of his time maintaining trails on the loch's northern shore. That summer, he was given a week-long contract to repair fencing along the eastern bank, where access was limited and the woods grew dense. He brought a small tent, a gas stove, and a camera he used to photograph wildlife and landscapes. His second night by the loch was still with a crescent moon rising. Duncan sat by his campfire near the water's edge, sipping tea when he noticed a pale glow just beneath the surface of the loch. At first he assumed it was moonlight, but it moved slowly against the direction of the current. Then it split into 2 lights, both round, both dim, and they began to rotate around one another like twin stars caught in orbit. He stood, camera in hand, and walked closer. The lights descended deeper into the water, then rose again, closer now, still beneath the surface, but casting a faint shimmer on the rocks at his feet. They were silent. The loch remained perfectly still. No waves, no splashes. Suddenly, a third light appeared, brighter, more concentrated, and shaped not like a ball, but a beam pointing directly upward. Duncan stepped back. He described the sensation as a pressure in the air, as though the atmosphere itself had thickened. He didn't feel fear, only awe, and a deep-rooted instinct not to move. The lights began to rise, still beneath the water, but faster now. Then they blinked out all at once, and the lock went black. The next morning, he found no sign of disturbance, but the photos on his camera, everyone taken that night, were completely blank. Not corrupted, just pure white frames as if exposed to direct light. The images before and after were unaffected. 2 days later, Duncan reported the incident to a local ranger. He didn't mention aliens, just lights, movement, and something not normal. The ranger listened silently. When Duncan finished, the man only said, "People forget how deep this lock really goes." In the years that followed, others began reporting strange sights on the eastern bank. Small lights under the water, fish found stunned but unharmed. And one diver, an experienced military-trained freediver, claimed to hear a low-frequency hum at 200 feet, like an engine buried in rock. No structures have ever been found at the bottom of Lomora, but the lights still return some nights, spinning, waiting just beneath the surface when nothing is supposed to shine. Story 14, The Transmission Tower, Montana, 1962. In 1962, deep in the snowy hills outside Great Falls, Montana, a small government communications site stood alone on a ridge. It was known simply as Tower 7, a steel radio tower with a low cinder block building at its base, staffed by 2 men per shift. Its purpose was basic: relay microwave signals between military installations. Most nights were uneventful. That winter, James Delaney, a quiet man with a background in electronics, worked the midnight shift alone. His partner had been reassigned unexpectedly, and until a replacement arrived, James maintained the equipment solo. It was on his 3rd night alone that things changed. Around 2:15 a.m., a low tone began to seep through the building's receiver. Not interference, not static, a precise, steady frequency. James checked the readouts. Nothing unusual. The tone didn't match any active channels. And when he tried to isolate it, the entire console dimmed. Then the tower lights flickered. He stepped outside into the freezing wind. The air was perfectly still, no storm, no clouds. But above the ridge, perhaps 30 feet above the tower's tip, hovered a dull, matte black object. It was disc-shaped, featureless, and completely silent. James stood motionless. The object remained perfectly still for nearly 2 minutes. Then, from its underside, a beam of red light extended, not onto the ground, but across the air, connecting directly to the top of the tower. And then the tone returned louder now, not from the equipment, but from the object itself. It vibrated in the metal around him, in the soil, in his chest. Then the light snapped off. The disc tilted slowly, turned without sound, and disappeared into the night sky in a smooth horizontal blur. No arc, no trail, just gone. James returned inside. The equipment was dead. The backup systems wouldn't engage, and when technicians arrived the next day, they found every recording tape from the previous 12 hours completely blank. He filed a standard report, omitting the object. But several nights later, a different technician, unaware of James's experience, refused to return after his shift. He'd heard a tone, he said, and felt like something was watching from above. By spring, Tower 7 was quietly shut down. The structure still stands, rusting in the wind, cables cut. Locals avoid the ridge, saying the air there feels wrong, and some still report seeing a faint red line stretching through the cold sky, far above where the signal ever should have gone. Story 15, The Floating Girl, Uzbekistan, 1995. In the spring of 1995, a small village outside Samarkand, Uzbekistan, experienced an event that was whispered about for years but never formally reported. It was a place of quiet farms and wide skies where children played in the fields and elders watched the world move slowly past. One of those children was a girl named Amina. She was 10 years old, shy, and often wandered the meadows behind her family's home. On a warm afternoon in late April, she was seen walking toward the edge of the fields with her usual notebook and pencil. She liked to draw birds and clouds. That evening, however, she didn't return. The sun had just set when her older brother ran back to the house, pale and out of breath. He'd seen Amina floating, not lying down, not levitating off the ground in sleep. Floating upright, arms at her sides, 10 feet in the air, motionless. At first, her parents thought it was a trick or a child's panic, but when they and several neighbors hurried to the edge of the field, they saw it too. Amina hovered silently above the grass. Above her, a perfect silver sphere hovered, smooth, metallic, no markings. It made no sound, no light. It simply hung in the air, directly above the girl, as if tethered by some invisible string. One witness later described the scene as too quiet, as if all sound had been drawn away. Amina did not cry, did not move. Her eyes were open, calm, focused on something no one else could see. Then, without warning, the sphere pulsed just once and began to rise. Amina followed. She ascended slowly, eyes still fixed on something above. At 20 feet, her body seemed to shimmer. Then gently, she was lowered back to the ground. As soon as her feet touched the earth, the sphere vanished. No trail, no flash, just empty sky. Amina blinked, looked around, and asked why everyone was staring. She remembered nothing. No sound, no floating, no silver light. Doctors found nothing wrong with her. She lived a long, quiet life and never showed signs of trauma. But for the rest of her days, she claimed she often dreamed of shapes, perfect glowing spheres, and said she felt most at peace when walking near the edge of the fields